For thousands of years, the great Sphinx of Egypt has presided majestically over the Giza Plateau. Is it possible that this enigmatic man-beast is about to break the silence of the centuries and bring the world a better understanding of our origins?
Is there a treasure of untold knowledge guarded by the Sphinx, and has it already been found? The riddle of the Sphinx has remained unsolved through the centuries. Are we any closer to solving the puzzle today? Or is the Egyptian government determined to prevent anyone from finding the answers? Is it possible that the Sphinx, even today, stands guard over some still undiscovered chamber? Or is this, as some archaeologists claim, simply the fractured face of the pharaoh Chephren?
Will Egypt give up one more secret? The disturbing answers are straight ahead. And in part 2 of this episode, much of the confusion, hatred, and animosity in the world today can be traced to a single event, the mixing up of language at the Tower of Babel. But was there ever such a place to begin with? And if there was, has it been found today?
Was there a time in the distant past when everyone spoke the same language and essentially belonged to the same race? What evidence has been uncovered to suggest that people really did begin to build a gigantic tower that would reach to the heavens? Can we determine, with the help of the modern sciences of linguistics, sociology, and archaeology, that a common language and common ancestry all proceed from a single place and a single point in time?
We'll see if there's a modern answer to this age-old riddle in part 2 of this episode. And in just a moment, we'll discover if science and scholarship can tell us what, if anything, is underneath the Sphinx.
We all go through life accepting what textbooks told us about the universe. But what happens when questions are raised about many of our fundamental beliefs? A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you've never imagined possible. Encounters with the Unexplained.
A silent puzzle sits, as it has for thousands of years, massive, mute, and mysterious, on the stark Giza Plateau in Egypt. It is called simply the Sphinx, and scientists, Egyptologists, and mystics throughout the centuries have argued over its meaning and its reported secret chamber. The very purpose of the Sphinx has always been one of the most intriguing parts of this archaeological riddle. It's there, but nobody knows precisely why it's there. The most prominent theory is that it is simply a monument to the pharaoh Chephren, but that idea has been challenged in recent years. Archaeologists and geologists alike have suggested the Sphinx is much too old to be a monument to Chephren. Is it possible that people from another older and more advanced civilization, perhaps even from another world, constructed the Sphinx as a repository for their knowledge and wisdom?
The lion-like body of the Sphinx and the walls of the Sphinx enclosure where it sits show, in my opinion, indisputable evidence of water erosion. Erosion caused by rainfall, caused by precipitation. Now this is incompatible with the Sahara Desert, which has existed in this part of Egypt since about 3000 BC. And what this means is that the Sphinx must be much older than 3000 BC, and this really upsets and overthrows the chronologies of ancient Egypt.
Up to this time, Egyptologists and geologists believed that sand blowing over the Sphinx for thousands of years, certainly not water erosion, caused its deep weathering patterns. After all, Egypt is an arid desert.
Looking at it as a geologist, I was absolutely amazed. What you find on the Giza Plateau is predominantly two types of weathering. Most of the monuments have been scoured by wind, by sand abrasion, the wind picking up the sand, blowing steadily, taking out the softer horizontal layers, giving a very angular appearance to the rock. What you see in the Sphinx enclosure and on the body of the Sphinx is very different in nature. There you get a rolling, rounded, undulating, weathered, and eroded surface. I came to the conclusion that this type of weathering seen around the Sphinx and on the body of the Sphinx could only be caused by precipitation.
Egypt is a desert and has been so for about 7,000 years. Do we know when, if ever, wet, rainy weather conditions existed in Egypt?
Today, the Giza Plateau sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert. However, Egypt has not always been a hyper-arid region. In fact, after the breakup of the end of the Ice Age, about 10,000 to 8,000 BC, it was for long periods of time wet green savanna with plenty of rainfall. It's only been since about 3000 BC that you've had the Sahara Desert developing and dominating the area. Looking at the erosion patterns on the Sphinx that had to be caused by rainfall in tremendous amounts of rainfall, this dates the body of the Sphinx to well before 3000 BC, and that means well before dynastic Egypt, well before the first dynasty, about 3000 BC.
Somewhere between 10,000 BC and 3000 BC. Now that's a pretty wide range. In 7,000 years, a lot of weathering can take place. Is there any way to come at least a little closer to an exact date for the Sphinx's construction?
With seismic expert Dr. Thomas DeBecke, we did a seismic survey around the Sphinx within the Sphinx enclosure, and what we found was incredibly interesting. If the Sphinx had been carved all at one time, we would expect to find subsurface weathering that was consistent and even around all four sides of the Sphinx. What we found was very, very different. Along the back or rump of the Sphinx, the weathering was relatively shallow. It was much deeper and consistently deeper on the other three sides. What this indicates to me very clearly is that the rump or rear of the Sphinx was carved out and freed from the rock much later than the other three sides.
Some geologists intensely disagree with Schock's astonishing findings and suggest that weathering mechanisms other than rainfall runoff cause the Sphinx's weathering. Their analysis supports the Sphinx's accepted date of 2500 BC.
Because the Sphinx was buried in sand up to its neck throughout most of its history, the weathering pattern seen today may have largely resulted from the chemical effects of wet sand lying against the Sphinx's body and the enclosure walls. The source of the water in the sand was the intermittent rainfall over the past 4,500 years, and to much lesser extent, exceptionally high Nile River floods. During the times when the Sphinx was not buried, salt crystallization and erosion by rainfall runoff further accentuated the weathering pattern.
When you study the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure, one thing you have to be careful about is sorting out the different types of weathering that you see, so we can test these alternative hypotheses. And the only hypothesis that holds up, that the erosional features seen in the Sphinx enclosure were caused by precipitation. They were caused by rainfall and runoff associated with rainfall, which has to date before 3000 BC.
But if that's true, shouldn't there be other structures at Giza that also show evidence of rainfall erosion?
John Anthony and West, my colleague, and I have found a number of structures that seem to date back to this much earlier period. Just to give one example, on the Saqqara Plateau in Egypt, there are very interesting tombs. No one's dated them precisely, that show very, very deep weathering, and these to us appear to be from the Sphinx age, from pre-dynastic times.
The question then becomes, was it technically possible to build it then, and if so, who built it and why? Is there some other entirely different way to determine how much older the Sphinx could be?
The ancient Egyptian texts are replete with references to a remote golden age which existed prior to their own history. They call it Zep Tepi, or the first time. Zep Tepi would have ushered in the age of Leo in 10,500 BC. At the spring equinox, in the age of Leo, the Lion constellation would have risen just before the sun. It could have been seen due east and in perfect alignment with the Great Sphinx of Egypt. So it could be argued that the Great Sphinx was built to behold on the horizon its own image which appeared in 10,500 BC.
Plato was the first to talk about the lost continent of Atlantis, and for centuries his tale was the only source of information regarding this ancient legend. Plato is also the only source of information about how Atlantis sunk beneath the sea and was completely destroyed. But there are other ancient texts that describe hidden chambers and tunnels under the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau. Is it just coincidence that all these texts agree that all of this was supposed to have happened about 10,000 BC?
There are a number of ancient sources from both Egypt and elsewhere which refer to secret chambers and underground passageways both beneath and in the vicinity of the Sphinx and the Pyramid at Giza. One of the most interesting of these is the Westcar papyrus dating to the 4th Pharaonic dynasty, which refers to a sage called Jeddah, who speaks of what he calls the sacred chambers of the Book of Thoth. Jeddah is said to have guided the pharaoh Cheops, or Khufu, to the location of keys which it was prophesied would open the secret chamber, the library where the scrolls were kept. Herodotus, the Greek historian, writing in 443 BC, after visiting Egypt, reported that extending beneath and far beyond the pyramid was a vast labyrinth, and the way into it underground. Of course, if Plato and other ancient writers are to be believed, there was indeed a civilization much older than Egypt, in fact, many thousands of years older.
The question was unexplored until the modern era, when a fantastical history of Atlantis was devised. That history suggests that when the continent was destroyed, around 10,500 BC, some survivors traveled east to Egypt. These survivors brought records and artifacts from Atlantis to Egypt and deposited them in a secret room called the Atlantean Hall of Records. This Hall of Records was supposedly located between the Sphinx and the river toward the east. The reason being that as the sun rises from the water, the line of the shadow falls between the paws of the Sphinx. It is also believed by some that this Hall of Records would necessarily correlate geometrically to the surrounding buildings, particularly the pyramids and temples. The Book of Mysteries, that is, the land of Egypt, seems to be endless. If the measurable erosion of the Sphinx predates all other existing stone monuments in Egypt, yet the stonework is far more advanced than the 4th dynasty, then doesn't that prove that an advanced civilization occupied the Nile Delta long before the Egyptians appeared? Do we now have conclusive evidence that supports the theories of a lost ancient civilization? And is the Egyptian government trying to suppress that evidence? Is there a still-to-be-discovered chamber somewhere near or even under the Sphinx, filled with ancient wisdom that they don't want us to know about? Let's continue this amazing journey. Archaeology is a science that tries to enhance the present by illuminating the past, and many recent archaeological discoveries have done just that. But how do we separate myth from history when only the legend is left behind? Legend says that the Hall of Records is there, if we can find it. So far, archaeologists have been unable to do so.
Thoth was the Egyptian god responsible for preserving ancient records, and it is said that these writings were put into a secret chamber. This caused lots of treasure hunters seeking gold to force their way into some of the pyramids. Today, we're less interested in gold and more interested in finding a window in the past. So we're using sophisticated technology rather than brute force.
In 1991, Robert Schoch and John West brought seismologist Thomas Dobecki to the Giza Plateau to apply seismic technology to the dating of the Sphinx.
Although not the primary focus of my geological investigations, when Tom Dobecki and I were doing the seismic work, we did find some interesting results. One of these, it looks like it could be an artificial or human carved structure, some kind of chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx. And we found this using our seismic techniques of pounding with a sledgehammer on a steel plate and then analyzing the vibrations as they went into the rock and then bounced back up.
Could the chamber that Schoch and Dobecki found in front of the Sphinx be the fabled Hall of Records? Other expeditions have tried to locate it for years, all of them without success.
The search for the Hall of Records continues to this very day. The most recent effort was by Dr. Joseph Shore under the auspices of Florida State University. As recently as 2 years ago, there was a publicly announced plan to, with the aid of ground-penetrating radar, to map the entire Giza Plateau. Unfortunately, though, the Egyptian Antiquities authorities called a halt to Shore's efforts. Shore's been reluctant to talk about his findings thus far. However, he did comment at a recent conference. His group has, he said, pinpointed an anomalous underground area about 35 feet beneath the Sphinx. He described it as a chamber of about 25 by 40 feet, with walls rising to a height of about 45 feet.
In 1996 and 1998, Florida State University, they came and they used radar to try to find out what's underneath the Sphinx. They sent us a proposal saying that underneath the Sphinx there is a room. And there is a big tunnel existed from the Great Pyramid to the small Queen Pyramid to the east side of the Great Pyramid. And they wanted to drill. We gave them permission to drill near the Great Pyramid. And for 1 month, they drilled everywhere and they could not find anything. If the radar will show an anomaly, the anomaly in the mind of a New Age person could be a room or a chamber. But in our mind, it could be a natural crack.
But what if the so-called Hall of Records isn't under the Sphinx at all? Could there be other locations for the hidden chamber? If so, how could we go about finding it in the vastness of the Egyptian labyrinth?
I believe that Thoth's builders were working to a blueprint that was far too sophisticated to be foiled by barbarians using force or even scientists using technology. Thoth was working with the ancient art of illusion. The pyramids and the Sphinx are all misdirection. Marvelous misdirection, but misdirection nevertheless. And they lead and point to a picture of the whole Giza complex, which is something we should be looking at as a whole.
Traditional Egyptologists are as certain that no chamber lies undiscovered under or near the Sphinx as they are of its 4,500-year-old age.
Based on the reading of the radar, there is nothing underneath the Sphinx, and the Hall of Record is just a myth.
If indeed there is a Hall of Records found, it may provide evidence that the Egyptian civilization is older than its accepted date of 5,000 years ago. So it is understandable that clear scientific evidence of rainfall erosion on the Sphinx complex could be discredited by Egyptologists because it threatens the official version of Egyptian civilization.
What causes traditional Egyptologists to react as if the possibility of an ancient civilization that predates by far the accepted beginning of Egyptian civilization would threaten the very fabric of Egyptian culture? Do they think it's a Western plot to subvert everything that Egypt is or was? And why is it the search for the Hall of Records is seen as both important and disturbing to some officials?
A Hall of Records could be a link between our world and another, perhaps similar world, which could have existed before the deluge, which accompanied the last ice age.
Is the scientific evidence that the Sphinx is much older than commonly believed the smoking gun that proves the existence of an earlier advanced civilization?
If an ancient and advanced pre-Diluvian society, Atlantis perhaps, were to leave a record of itself, one that could only be understood by a society which had achieved a similar level of development, it's plausible that they would have taken steps to protect that record from the coming dark ages when no one could possibly have understood their achievement. Such a record would be a mystery until a new day of enlightenment dawned. In the great science fiction novel A Canticle for Leibowitz, author Walter Miller Jr. envisions a future post-apocalyptic world in which few fragments of our present world have survived a nuclear holocaust. Within a few hundred years, humanity has once again fallen into barbarism. A handful of cloistered monks seek to stave off the effects of cultural amnesia. Unfortunately, though, the brothers have lost the keys to understanding their mysterious predecessors. One consecrated monk spends a lifetime lovingly illuminating with gold scrollwork the incredibly complicated schematic diagram of a simple electronic circuit. A simple idea like the cyclical nature of history, the idea that we've been this way before, could do a lot to help us understand why so many enigmatic ancient monuments and achievements are so much more sophisticated than current conventional wisdom can explain.
Could it be we're trying to add gold scroll work to a meaningless schematic? Or is there something of inestimable value hidden away in this mystic vault? The fact is, the Egyptian government seems to be doing everything possible to slow down or prevent the secret chamber's discovery. But assuming that the secret chamber does exist somewhere on the Giza Plateau, why are researchers and investigators so intent on finding it? What if it's just another empty chamber?
It is possible that a very ancient and very wise civilization could have foreseen a coming dark age of many millennia and have taken steps to leave a message, a kind of time capsule, if you will, that was designed to survive the long interval between its era and another age of comparable enlightenment. If that is so, it is difficult to overstate the importance of such a message.
Since Plato first told the story of the lost continent of Atlantis, it has generated controversy. But somehow its connection to Egypt has remained firm, with the archaeological timelines appearing to be tantalizingly accurate. But if a remnant of the lost continent did wind up in Egypt, is it likely they would have saved only their records?
I believe that inside the chamber, we will find evidence of a long-lost civilization that is thousands of years older than anything that archaeologists are assuming today. They might even be engraved on soft metal like the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they could tell stories of the end of Atlantis. The possibilities are endless and endlessly exciting.
We do not need to search for secret chambers in order to find evidence of an advanced civilization in ancient Egypt. Nor do we have to credit people from outside of Egypt in its creation. The evidence of this civilization is out in the open on the Giza Plateau and other parts of Egypt. This knowledge of this ancient civilization is handed down through the oral tradition of the indigenous people of Egypt. When we look in the ancient Egyptian toolbox for the tools that supposedly create these marvelous artifacts, we find nothing to explain them. They are incapable of creating these precision contours, smooth surfaces, and extremely precise.
Dr. Abdel Hakim Ayan is both a Western-trained Egyptologist and a guardian of an indigenous Egyptian tribe, a keeper of the tribe's wisdom, handed down through the ages.
The Sphinx is carved out of a natural rock. And even before it's carved, people used to come to energize themselves here. And according to our traditions, they've been coming here to energize themselves 56,000 years ago.
But if the Sphinx started its life as a natural limestone outcropping and a place of some sort of natural power, how and when, and perhaps more importantly, why, was it carved to its present form?
The Sphinx was carved in 3 stages. First the head, then the front, and then the back. Altogether, probably took 30 years to carve the Sphinx out of a natural rock. Limestone blocks that weighed over 80 tons were moved to carve the Sphinx, and they were used to build the Sphinx temple.
Turning once again to the traditional Egyptian toolbox for lifting and moving, we find ropes, ramps, the lever, a huge workforce, and a lot of time. Were these really the only tools available for the construction of the Sphinx and the Sphinx temple?
We believe that ultrasonic machining may have been used to carve the Sphinx and some sort of anti-gravitational device used to lift the blocks.
An ancient device created a sound vibration to produce an electromagnetic field that overcame gravity. This ultrasonic disc, in the hands of a qualified craftsman, it really works.
It appears that modern research has generated more questions than answers, and the riddle of the Sphinx, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, is still wrapped in an enigma. Is there a secret chamber called the Hall of Records, filled with the history and wisdom of the ages? It is possible, of course, that some unforeseen event or circumstance will ultimately unlock the secrets of the Sphinx, and modern research continues to search for answers both above and below the desert sand. But just as it has for thousands of years, for now, the Sphinx stands majestically mute. Man, however, has always been considerably more vocal and telling than the Sphinx. Can we discover the origin of language, man's most useful and most defining characteristic? According to the Bible, all our languages sprang from one incident, the destruction of the Tower of Babel. In today's world of global commerce, translation services cost nations and industry $250 billion every year. Even in areas as ancient and as closely aligned as the European community, the cost of straightening out all the confusion supposedly caused at the Tower of Babel can amount to billions of dollars. According to the Bible, there was a time that there was only one language and one race of people, and all languages and races in the world had their origins at one place and point in time, the moment of the cataclysmic destruction of the legendary Tower of Babel. But was such a tower actually constructed as described in the Bible? More to the point, did God destroy it and disperse all the inhabitants across the face of the land? Have the ruins of the tower been located by archaeologists? And does this modern-day dictator have some sinister plan in mind for its reconstruction? Scientists and investigators try to bring the pieces of the puzzle together. Language, the experts tell us, is the single most defining characteristic of society. It is the architecture of culture and the glue that binds a people together. It is also the thing that drives nations and peoples apart. But where did all of these languages come from? Did they just spring up by accident? Or is there some scientific support for the biblical account of the Tower of Babel?
We cannot prove the existence of the Tower of Babel.
Not only was there a real Tower of Babel in the past, the tower and the city that bore its name is being rebuilt today by the world's most dangerous dictator.
No knowledgeable person believes the account of the Tower of Babel as historical fact, or that all the races and language of the earth sprang from this one little area in Mesopotamia.
The biblical story of Babel is completely consistent with all of the evidence. Anyone who denies this fact is simply engaging in fantasy or speculation.
Actually, the Tower of Babel concept of racial and language generation is quite easily demonstrated through archaeology, linguistics, and genetics.
According to the Sumerian writings, the temple towers of Mesopotamia were communication centers with the ancient astronauts, or gods.
I believe the tower was intended as a communication device, but not with any so-called ancient astronauts, rather with the spirit world of demons and fallen angels.
As you can see, there is no lack of opinion on the subject. There is, however, considerable lack of agreement. Where was the tower located? Is the term Babel the historic name of Babylon? Was the tower completely destroyed, or should we be able to find some remnant of it? Or is the entire story simply a religious myth? To begin with, let's take a look at the story as it was recorded. God was very displeased with what people had become. According to the Bible, wickedness in all its forms was the order of the day. So, God commanded a man named Noah to build an ark. Only Noah and his family were to be saved from a devastating flood that would destroy the world. After the floodwaters subsided, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and Noah and his family descended the mountain to begin life anew. It certainly follows that if the survivors of the flood were all of one family, they would surely all speak the same language. They were specifically instructed to not stay in one place, but to go forth and replenish the earth. Instead, they settled in a fertile plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. But when the descendants of Noah began building a tower to the heavens, God decided to disperse them. But is this account of the story of Babel fact or fiction? Assuming a tower was really built, are we sure we know why? And by whom? Is it even remotely possible that all the races and languages of the world began here, in this one single location? What was happening in what the Bible calls the land of Shinar that might bring such an undertaking about? The Bible tells us King Nimrod was a great hunter and a builder of ancient cities in what is now modern-day Iraq. The biblical account doesn't contain many specifics, which leaves us with a double mystery to explore. First, can we actually find a Tower of Babel? And secondly, is there any way to trace the origins of races and languages back to the destruction of that tower? The Bible is silent on the day-to-day events that may have occurred during the construction of the tower. However, we can speculate on how events may have unfolded in Nimrod's kingdom.
Almighty King Nimrod, hearken to the word. The God of our grandfathers' grandfathers cries out in warnings. Go out and make new nations. Stay not here to spite God. Will ye bring down the floodwaters again?
Now, what was your complaint, Vizier?
Not a complaint, Majesty. What the old beggar cries in the street is whispered in some quarters.
Well, who is this god? What is his name?
It is not difficult to imagine a haughty king reluctant to give up the wealth and comfort they had been able to build up in the generations since Noah and his sons came out of the ark. Some undoubtedly were already relegating the story of the flood to the category of myth and legend, while others saw in the work the opportunity to amass a great fortune for themselves. For centuries, skeptics challenged the Bible's accuracy on the Tower of Babel, primarily because they believed the land of Shinar, as referred to in the Bible, did not exist. But, as is so often the case, the scholars ultimately had to give way in the face of new discoveries.
For many years, scholars and students of the Bible questioned the location, even the existence, of the land of Shinar. They knew that Babylon existed from eyewitness ancient historians such as Herodotus and Strabo, who claimed to have seen the great city. But they had no proof, apart from the Bible, that the area around Babylon was ever called the land of Shinar. Then, in the early part of the last century, archaeologists brought forth thousands of cuneiform tablets like this one. On such tablets from Egypt, Syria, and the Hittite and Hurrian kingdoms was the name Shinar in various pronunciations.
Most scholars believe that the original location of the Tower of Babel was here, in what we now know as Iraq. Historians of antiquity, including Alexander the Great, all wrote of seeing the ruins of the Tower of Babel, but they don't tell us precisely where. There have been innumerable archaeological digs over the past 100 years that have unearthed the great treasures of Sumer, Assyria, and Babylon, and a number of sites have been advanced as the logical site of the tower.
The strongest body of archaeological evidence, combined with the biblical account, favors the location of Temenanke, which is in the country of Iraq, in the city of Babylon, 50 miles south of Baghdad. Today, in the city of Babylon, you can go to the Nebuchadnezzar Museum, where they feature a model of this tower as it would have existed in the time of Nebuchadnezzar.
Can we assume, then, that the location of the tower has finally been established? Other reputable investigators don't think so. But what is going on in Iraq to make people think the issue has been resolved? Does the model represent some actual archaeological discovery, or is it just a guess designed to build up the reputation of this man, Saddam Hussein, and, like King Nimrod, make him look important, even indestructible, in the eyes of his people? Something extraordinary is going on today in and around the ancient city of Babylon. Let's try and get to the bottom of it. The book of Genesis is a narrative about beginnings, and certainly one of those beginnings is the record of how human beings came to speak different languages. If the account of the flood is true, it's easy to imagine a time when all of Noah's descendants, the only survivors of the flood, all spoke the same language. But as is so often the case in the Bible narratives, certain proud and ambitious men decided to ignore God and build a tower so high it would put the king on a level with heaven itself. Still, for an undertaking of this size and scope, the toll on the people must have been enormous. Construction of the tower no doubt demanded more and more laborers and money. The heavy hand of Nimrod was felt in every quarter. The tower was to be more than just a monument to human vanity. It was meant to put Nimrod far above any competition, demonstrating his influence and power. He hoped to make such a great name for himself that none would dare oppose him. The bricks were fire-hardened to make them last through the centuries, and everything was done that could be done to celebrate the king's vanity.
There is absolutely no valid reason for questioning the biblical narrative. The historical evidence lends support to the Genesis record. Abydnus, a Greek historian of the 4th century, wrote, "Until this time all men had used the same speech, but now there was sent upon them a confusion of many and diverse tongues." The 1st century historian Josephus wrote, "When all men were of one language, some of them built a tower, as if they would thereby ascend up to heaven, but the gods sent storms of wind and overthrew the tower and gave every one his particular language, and for this reason the city was called Babylon."
Surely a structure of this size, made of fire-hardened brick, would leave some residue behind, even after thousands of years.
Archaeological evidence in the form of cuneiform tablets and reliefs on ancient trays and urns establishes the Tower of Babel's existence outside of the biblical account. Today, only a mound 150 feet above the surrounding plain remains of the Tower of Babel site. However, we do know what it looked like based on reliefs and historical records of Nebuchadnezzar, who rebuilt it in 600 BC following Nimrod's design. Cuneiform tablets reveal Babel had a square foundation, each side measuring 290 feet. The tower stood inside a thick-walled enclosure 450 yards by 500 yards and was surrounded by small chapels, lodging cottages for pilgrims, and a temple containing a pure gold statue of god Marduk, which probably wasn't a fixture of the original Nimrod temple. It is estimated that the Marduk god statue contained over $85 million of gold by today's gold prices. The best way to describe the Tower of Babel is to picture an 8-layer wedding cake, with each layer being smaller than the preceding one. It rose 300 feet into the air. That's 30 stories by today's standards. Gigantic blocks weighing hundreds of tons made up the central core of the tower, with an additional 58 million smaller bricks being used in the construction. Huge vertical stairways extended about 100 feet up the tower to the first story, while another stairway running perpendicular to the wall led to the second story. From the second story, secret passages and stairways led to the top, with resting positions along the way. The Tower of Babel, rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar, lasted for 200 years until the Persians destroyed it in 400 BC. Alexander the Great ordered 10,000 of his soldiers to clear away the rubble from the tower, but abandoned the project after 2 months. The bricks from the Tower of Babel were later used to build a dam that today diverts water from the Euphrates River into a side canal. The Tower of Babel was truly spectacular, and it was indeed the central feature of the ancient city of Babylon.
One thing seems certain: the tower was destroyed. According to the biblical account, God destroyed the tower and confused the language of the people so they would have to separate into races and nations. This brings up the last part of this mysterious story. Is it possible that all of the languages and races of the world have actually arisen out of the Tower of Babel incident?
There are roughly 5,000 languages in the world today, and 50 to 200 unrelated stocks. We can trace the best known of those languages, the Indo-European system, back to about 3000 BC, roughly the time of Babel. After that, we run into a blank wall. To give an idea of how rapidly languages can change, here's a line from Beowulf written in about the 8th century AD. This is a line of Old English. Try to recognize it. Volde gumen findanton et ehimons weofote sarigetiode. That translates into modern English as he wanted to find the man who had harmed him while he slept. Now, if English could change that much in a period of approximately 1,300 years, we have no reason to suppose that it took any longer for the other various language families to develop into their derivatives.
I can demonstrate quite simply that it is theoretically possible for all the races in the world today to have developed within a single generation after the Tower of Babel. Now this is called a Punnett square. The Punnett square is used by biologists to predict the distribution of genetic information. In this case, we will say that the population is all brown-skinned. From the brown-skinned population, we can produce all of the racial skin possibilities, including the black blacks and the white whites, possibly in one generation.
Could all of the races and language variations have come from one common source? Theoretically, it does seem possible.
It's common knowledge in anthropology that the growth of world population in the ancient world began here in the Near East, primarily between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. The interesting thing about this is that we have a document in the book of Genesis that describes this ancient process as having begun right here in and around the Tower of Babel. And of course, this is exactly what modern anthropology knows by way of the evidence.
God confounded their languages and they were spread around the world. And you can go all over the world and see the evidence that the ancients of the past reconstructed what they were doing at Babel by building pyramids and ziggurat temples literally all over the world associated with communing with the spirit world. The pattern of the ziggurat that was built in the ancient Sumerian area where the Tower of Babel was built can be found literally all over the world. Some of the pyramids and ziggurats are identical, and they're found in South America, they're found in Central America, they're found in Cambodia, in Indonesia, in India. Worldwide, there's evidence of ziggurats and towers associated with religious sites communicating with the spiritual dimension.
The end of the Tower of Babel story has not yet been reached. Even as we speak, one more chapter is unfolding. When Nebuchadnezzar still reigned in the city of Babylon 2,500 years ago, he left his legacy for future kings inscribed on cuneiform tablets to repair and rebuild his temples and palaces. According to some Bible prophecy scholars, Babylon, the mightiest and wickedest city of the ancient world, must be rebuilt before the final battle of Armageddon. These ruins, lost for centuries under the shifting sands of Iraq, have now been fully uncovered. In these recently made films, it can be seen that the reconstruction of ancient Babylon is in fact a reality. It has long been a pet project of the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, and his engineers, architects, and artisans assure him that the city is rising once more. In fact, several of the buildings have been completed. Plans are also underway for a complete reconstruction of the Tower of Babel. The world does not know Saddam Hussein's motive for the rebuilding of Babylon and the fabled Tower of Babel, but perhaps we're about to find out. Whatever his motive, our search for beginnings in this remarkable story is largely a search for ourselves, and that can be the most elusive quest of all.